Hello, everyone. It's Jerry at the Fledge, and we've got a crowd here tonight to listen to an author who I think has written a very, very important book. I will introduce her in just one moment, but first I'd like to thank Pam Lynch with Harm Reduction Michigan for setting this up. I really appreciate her. I thank you. I made you blush earlier when I said you were the first person that gave me a meaningful hug that understood what I was going through after my daughter died, and I really appreciate you for that. And Shannon doesn't count, of course, because she was the one hugging me the most. I think that over the years, I've talked a lot about the death of my daughter when she overdosed from fentanyl, and how that started with a minor in possession for cigarettes in high school, and how the system kind of walked her into her addiction and her eventual overdose. And I probably sound like a rationalizing or irrational bias fool as I rambled through that and begged for you all to listen to me. And tonight, I'm honored to have Colleen Cowles here and give you the objective reasons and things that are happening and tell you about what's going on from her perspective as a lawyer, right? As somebody very familiar with the judicial system. And it's just an honor to have you here. Her book, War on Us, it's not a war on drugs. It never has been. It's a racist lie, and it's a war on us. And I can't wait to hear what she has to say. This book you can find on Amazon, and so you'll probably give details here at some point, right? Okay. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for watching online. And I'm going to give it away to you, Colleen Cowles.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks to Pam for with Harm Reduction Michigan. I really appreciate the interest that you've got. I appreciate you guys coming. This topic is dear to my heart. As an attorney, I thought I understood the system 20 years ago. Then addiction landed on our own doorstep, and I quickly realized that I didn't have a clue. That helped me to understand some of the dysfunction that we have in the system, because I truly believe that the vast majority of people working in the system think they're doing the right thing, are good-hearted, really want to make change, but they're not seeing the whole picture. And unfortunately, the only people that really see the whole picture are typically those we've deemed to be criminals and nobody will listen to. So I found myself in a unique position with the legal background, but also now the personal experience in our own family. And the further we got involved with the criminal justice system on a personal level, the more I realized that I had to speak out and I had to educate, because there is just so much misperception and there is so much opportunity if we only make use of what's out there. Something that's unique about this topic, usually we can take time to learn. In this topic, if we take too much time to learn, it can be deadly. It can end up with people having felony convictions. It can end up with people behind bars, and it can end up with people dead because we don't understand soon enough. So I'm hoping that through these educational programs, I can expedite the learning curve for all of you, for anyone listening. You know, there's so much that needs to be done. We talk a lot about the overdose crisis in the country, but this puts it in a little bit of perspective. 9/11, when the Twin Towers went down, just shy of 3,000 people died. And that changed our world. I mean, in every aspect, all of us know that. It was a different world after that day. Yet when you look at overdose statistics, in 2022, which is the last year that we had a full year of recording, we lost 109,000 people to overdose. That's a Twin Towers attack every 10 days. So putting that in perspective, the world should change. It's time to put the science and medicine into place that we now have, and to be able to move past the protocols of the 1930s and the drug war that's failed so miserably over the last 50 years. Even if we don't look at the misery that's caused, just looking at, from a practical standpoint, over $1 trillion of US taxpayer dollars have been wasted. We have the highest addiction rates in the world. We have the highest overdose rates in the world, and we have the highest incarceration rates in the world. Now, if you Google that, there are some studies that show that we're no longer first in incarceration. We're under Iran and a few other places. I'm not sure which statistics are right, but either way, it's nothing to be proud of, and it's certainly not something that we should be continuing to spend billions and billions of dollars on, money not well spent. It's time to use Albert Einstein's genius. Insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over when it's not working. So before I have you totally depressed, we are at the best time in history. You wouldn't know it when you look at the statistics, but we are at the best time in history to effectively treat addiction. We have come so far with science and with medicine, and I'll talk a lot about that tonight. The problem is that we have not accepted, and a lot of people don't even realize that we have these protocols at this point that can solve the issue. So let's start with a few questions, and that's why you have the paper and pencil. This is just kind of to test yourself, to get you thinking a little bit, and to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about tonight. So you won't be graded, you won't have to hand this in, nobody's gonna be testing you. But just write down your best guess. Maybe some of you know the statistics or the answers to the questions, but just make a note of what you think. And we're going to go through 6 questions, and then we'll talk about the answers. So question number 1, what percentage of those who try drugs become addicted? And we've got 4 choices: 0 to 25%, 26 to 50, 51 to 75, and over 75. Second question, the most effective treatment technique for substance use disorder is, and again, if you don't know, take a guess. Question 3, true or false, punishing drug users has effectively reduced addiction and overdose rates? Question 4, true or false, most people outgrow drug addiction? Question 5, is addiction a choice or a health issue? And 6, true or false, parents helping teen or adult children during active addiction is harmful enabling? Okay, so let's touch base on the answers here. On question 1, the answer is 0 to 25%. And here are the statistics. One of the reasons that I put this question in is I attended a presentation by a liaison officer with the police department. And he stood up, and it was largely parents in the room. He stood up and said, anyone who has a child who has a meth addiction might as well give up hope, because there is no hope. And the only possible hope is if they're put in prison for many, many, many years. And even then, there's not much hope. That statement was so wrong on so many levels. But the reality is that a lot of the public believes that if you try a drug, you're going to be addicted. So addiction rates, there's one big exception, and that's nicotine, 67.5%. Looking at that statistic, our drug policy obviously isn't based on what's the most addictive drug. It's not based on what's the most harmful drug. But nicotine is 67.5%. I didn't include that in addiction rates because it would throw off the statistics, and it's kind of a different it's not considered part of the war on drugs. Addiction rates for heroin is 23%. Now that's still very high, and it's very dangerous, but it is 23%. Methamphetamine is also 23% if all regular users are addicted. So the studies asked how many people were regularly using meth. So assuming that all of them are actually addicted, 23% on meth. Alcohol, 22.7%, cocaine, 20.9%, and cannabis, 8.9%. So when you look at averages, it depends on how they're calculated. Because there's more cannabis users than anything else, the averages are cited at between 10 and 20%. But this is the breakdown. Now with those, there's a couple of things to consider. And these statistics may not matter to families that are dealing with addiction because they're obviously in that 20%. But before we stigmatize people, before we incarcerate people, before we destroy their lives, maybe we should consider that 80% of the people that did the same thing didn't get addicted. So when we're looking at mandating treatment, there is a very high shortage of treatment in the country. But if someone is picked up on a drug charge, they might be in that 80%. They don't need treatment, but they're taking the treatment that someone in the 20% really needs. It's also easy for the 80% to say, well, I could stop. Of course, you should just make a different choice, make a better choice, and stop using drugs. But the reality is that the brain, the thought processes, the history, there's a lot of reasons that people fall into that 10 to 20%. It's different than the 80%. So for the 80% to judge the 20% really is highly unfair. Next question, the most effective treatment technique for substance use disorder is drugs. Now, talk about counterintuitive, but drugs, medications are the most effective treatment. Multiple studies have shown that the treatment success rate on the 12 steps program, which I am a believer in. I think the community of 12 steps, there are people that, 12 steps has saved their lives, but the overall success rate is between 5 and 10%. So when parents are spending, selling their homes or dipping into the retirement to send their children to very expensive programs, a lot of times that ends badly. Medications, and this is according to the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, medications cut overdose rates in half. That's huge. Medications to treat addiction are on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. There are multiple studies. It's not debatable anymore. It is solid science that these medications are very effective. They're also not talked about a lot, and we'll talk a little later about all of the prohibitions. So not only are we not promoting the best, the most successful treatment technique, but we're also putting up all kinds of barriers so that it can't be used. Now, let me be clear, that medications aren't a one-size-fits-all. 12 steps isn't a one-size-fits-all. There is no one-size-fits-all when we're looking at a complex issue like this. But it is an opportunity to be able to solve the challenges. Suboxone, all of these, by the way, are for opioids. They allow someone who is addicted to opioids to, now Suboxone it's an opioid, but it will replace the opioid being used with a medication that will not be mind altering. So people can switch from the opioids that they're addicted to Suboxone without going through withdrawals. So a lot of the barriers to people wanting to accept help are solved with the medications because they don't go through withdrawals. They're not completely changing their life. They're not, leaving and going somewhere else for a long period of time. So they work. Vivitrol is not an opioid. That is an injectable form of a drug that will block an opioid. So basically, if someone is on Vivitrol, if they take an opioid, they will not feel any, they won't get any good out of it. There's benefits and detriments to the different medications available. Vivitrol works quite well for people who are coming out of treatment or have been in jail. Because for Vivitrol, you have to have been off of opioids for 7 to 10 days or you will go through massive withdrawals. So it's not practical in a lot of cases, but in certain cases, it's very practical. Vivitrol is also a little more accepted because it's not considered a controlled substance because it's not an opioid itself. On the other hand, some people have said that and some studies have shown that it can cause depression, severe depression in some people. And for some people, there are other side effects. So even with medications, it's not one size fits all. And I'm seeing that. I mean, we've gone from some jails not allowing any medications to mandating Vivitrol when someone leaves jail. Now, in theory, maybe that sounds like a good idea. But anytime we're doing a one size fits all, it's not a wise idea. Naltrexone is actually the ingredient in Vivitrol, but I put it separately because naltrexone pills can be very, very effective for alcohol addiction issues. You take a pill prior to the time you're going to go out, and it kills the desire to drink. But again, the idea that everything it's got to be total abstinence has blocked the information on that. So a lot of people aren't aware of it. But there have been a lot of people who had alcohol issues for many, many, many years and have used that pill to either become just social drinkers, or some of them ultimately just kind of lost the taste for it and quit drinking. Methadone is the medication that has been around the longest. And it is used very successfully for pregnant women or breastfeeding women because it's much less dangerous to use methadone than it is to go through withdrawal and go off of opioids. Methadone is, right now you have to go to a licensed clinic daily in order to get the methadone until someone stabilizes, and then sometimes they'll let someone take it at home. But that is another option. But many parents aren't aware of the treatment protocol with the highest success rates. When a parent is seeing a child go down the path of addiction, or if you have friends or anyone else, it's hard to know what to do. And there are people who say, well, we don't want to switch one drug for another. The reality is, if we can take someone who is in active addiction, who is risking street drugs and fentanyl and all of the things that go with active addiction, and we can convert them to using pharmaceutical grade, pure, licensed medications, it's definitely the thing to do. These medications as a group used to be referred to as medication-assisted treatment. The term has now been changed to, or MAT, the term has now been changed to MAUD, which is medications for opioid use disorder. The change came about because medication-assisted treatment, even when these medications were first looked at, the assumption was, well, they might be a nice supplement, but you still need all of the other programs. Now they've come to the conclusion that, and there's nothing wrong with doing the other programs, and that may increase the benefits, but the terminology has been changed because the medications can be very effective even on their own. It doesn't have to just be an assistance to something else. So next question, punishing drug users has effectively reduced addiction and overdose rates. I think with this group, you probably know the answer to that, but it is definitely false. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this that I've seen is that our whole policy in dealing with addiction increases trauma, it increases isolation. There are so many ways that it puts barriers between families and friends and being able to go to events. And someone on probation for a drug who maybe has never even used alcohol, a lot of probation requirements don't allow them to go anywhere that there might be alcohol. Well, that might wipe out family events, it might wipe out pool league, it might wipe out bowling. It's, you know, all of the things that connect people. All of a sudden, you could be sent to jail if you take part. So in so many ways, the more I dug into this and the more I talked to experts and families who've been affected, I realized that it's not only that the drug policy is not effective, it is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. Dr. Gamora Mate, who is an addiction psychologist in Vancouver, said if we wanted to design a system that escalated addiction and overdose rates, we would design exactly the system we have now. And I have found that to be very true. Question 4, true or false, most people outgrow drug addiction? The answer is true. The challenge with that is that once the frontal cortex starts to mature, drug use starts to subside. Studies have shown that, a study of over 42,000 Americans showed that by age 35, half of those who had qualified earlier as being addicted, having substance use disorder, no longer qualified under the definitions. The problem is that during that period of time, prior to the time that they age out, if we throw criminal records at them, if we traumatize them, the chances of aging out are much less. So once again, our policy is escalating the addiction overdose rates, which is shown by the statistics. Question 5, is addiction a choice or a health issue? This is a tough question because if you, and the answer is a health issue, but this is a tough one, especially if you ask the general public. I mean, they choose to take a pill, they choose to put a needle in their arm. How can it not be a choice? But the reality is that well, when we talked about everybody, you know, the 100% and 80% not becoming addicted, it is true that it's a choice if you try a drug. So I guess it's a choice if we say that anybody who has ever tried a drug has made that choice. But the reality is that, you know, most people, and, you know, whether it's caffeine or tobacco or nicotine or heroin, I mean, people use drugs. What swayed me on the health issue, and there's multiple studies now, every government agency, the AMA and the Society of Addiction Specialists all say that it is a health issue. And we can debate whether it's a disease or whether it's environmental or whatever. But what really swayed me, in addition to the studies, was the use of medications. Because even if everybody doesn't use the medications, the fact that you can take a medication and it cuts the overdose rate, but it also gives people back their lives. It takes them out of active addiction that is messing with their daily life. If you can take a pill or a medication that will do that, then how can it be a choice? It's a medical issue where someone is not getting treatment. You know, so we're incarcerating people because they're not getting the right medical treatment. So with a health issue or a choice, the whole basis for the war on drugs really goes out the window. Because, again, if we can treat it medically, there really is no point in blaming people and assuming that it's a choice. And if it was a choice, if we look at the incredibly punitive policies that we have, Shouldn't a few people have decided that maybe it wasn't the best thing to do that? But it's not working. I mean, we look at the numbers, it is not working. And all of this would kind of explain why. So assuming that the policymakers looked at this information and decided that it is a health issue, let's look at it like any other health issue. Okay, let's look at it as if we were diagnosed with diabetes and we apply the drug rules to it. Let's think about what would happen. So if you have diabetes, you'd probably go into a doctor who has some specialization in diabetes. You'd come up with an individual medical plan, not only about the diabetes, but probably about other physical ailments, mental health, all of that. Somebody would look at the whole picture. You design a plan that was individual to you. It might include insulin, it might include lifestyle changes, and you may or may not follow those recommendations. So, let me go back for just a minute. So let's look at a different scenario here. You've got diabetes, somebody offers you birthday cake, and you take a bite, and police show up because you have relapsed. Police show up, they arrest you. And so when you're put behind bars, the way out will be a judge or a probation officer or someone in the criminal justice system directing that you go to treatment, if treatment is even offered, but if you go to treatment, and it will probably be some type of peer support group. So you have no choices, and the people that are dictating your treatment are attorneys. Now, I'll tell you, I went to law school, and there were no medical courses there. So we have the health issue that is killing more Americans under 50 than any other health issue. And the people directing the treatment have law degrees. That doesn't make sense to me. So at that point, you go to treatment because the treatment that they direct, because you don't want to go to jail, and you fail. So now the fact that there was not individualized treatment that was directed by lawyers and you fail, but it's your fault because you must not have wanted it badly enough. And as a kicker, they tell family that it's negative enabling if you support that person. So even if things are happening that probably shouldn't happen in the criminal justice system, you have no support, you have no advocates, because parents have been convinced that the best thing they can do is let them hit bottom. Unfortunately, bottom can be death. And it brings more trauma, more isolation, and we're down the same path. So the punitive policies escalate addiction and overdose, and they consistently undo the progress that we've made. It's not unusual in working. I work with families now in not only the financial decisions and estate planning decisions and treatment decisions and that kind of thing. In working with families, it is not unusual for a family to figure this out, have their child on medications, doing well, getting their life back, and then having the criminal case come to the top of the pile. Because a lot of times you're not prosecuted right away. I mean, if it's so fearful to have people with addiction, that we have to lock them up, it seems odd to me that it takes months and months when nothing happens, and then all of a sudden it becomes important. It makes no sense. But often I'm seeing families who have spent a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of time, and now the person is doing well. And now the case comes to the top of the pile. One mother that I'm thinking about right now, her son had been, I think it was 4 months on medications, working a job that he now loved, doing very well. The prosecutor gave them the choice of going to a treatment program dictated by the court, which wouldn't allow medications. So you'd have to go off the medications and quit the job to go into that program, or go to prison. Those are the choices that families are actually running into with this system. We also have public housing issues. A lot of the federal programs, depending on the type of drug case it is, eligibility for public benefits may be compromised. And it's not only for the person with the drug conviction or the drug charge, it can also extend to family members. And if someone has the right kind of felony and visits family members, it can be enough to put them out of public housing. So the studies are clear that maintaining good relationships is the best thing to do as far as reducing recidivism rates and reducing addiction rates. And yet we have a system that puts barriers there. Rental is very difficult. I mean, we've got a huge homeless issue, and part of that is that with a felony conviction, it's almost impossible to rent a property, which it's an economic issue because there's no problem with buying a property. But by the time you get done with the court fees and everything else that goes with that and going through addiction, probably can't afford to buy a property. But if you can buy a property, you'll have housing. But if you want to rent it with a felony conviction, it's very difficult. Sober housing a lot of times ends up being by default, the place to go. Now, sober housing can be very, very beneficial for someone who is coming out of treatment. A lot of the sober houses are peer support, 12-step types of groups. So if someone is not going down that route, it can be difficult. A lot of sober houses don't allow medications. I went to a sober house with an individual looking for housing. I had called the sober house owner because I called around to find out which ones would allow him to stay on his medication. And this owner said, absolutely, we are evidence-based. And be careful about evidence-based. Everybody says evidence-based, but ask what that means, because those are kind of, it sounds great, but anyway, we get to the sober house. The manager of the sober house asked questions, including, are you on any medications? The individual said, yes, this is what I'm on. These are the prescriptions. This is what was recommended by the addiction specialist. And the house manager, without asking any questions about background, history, other medical issues, said, well, first thing, you got to get off those medications. Now, that presented all kinds of problems because that house manager, and I'm sure that he believed he was doing the right thing. He had been successful without medications. But that attitude, if that individual had ended up in that house, there's a very good chance that there would have been a lot of friction. He probably would have been thrown out of the house, which would have been a probation violation, and he would have ended up back in jail. And if a typical parent had gone to that meeting, they wouldn't know that, they would think, okay, I guess we do as we're told. And that happens a lot. So there's a lot of people behind bars. It has nothing to do with what they did or doing something wrong. It's a system that's set up for failure. So there's not a whole lot that the individual can do about that. We've also got some federal benefits, and this is something that I compliment Michigan on. They have opted out of a federal program that is really horrific and that states can opt out of. There's a statute that bans federal benefits under the TAMP program, which is Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, and the federal food stamp program, which is now referred to as SNAP. 2 minutes of debate, and they passed this law that pulls eligibility for those programs for people with drug convictions. Now, you can be a rapist, you can be a murderer, you can be a burglar, and you will get these benefits. But if you get picked up with a pill in your pocket, you're going to lose those benefits, unless your state has opted out, which Michigan did, thankfully. So criminal records just across the board destroy opportunity. I don't think that unless someone is living with that, it's hard to understand how at every step, whether it's career, housing, constant fees, it impacts life and makes it very, very difficult to move forward, even after someone has actually dealt with their addiction. So drug policy in general, I think people want to believe that our systems have some logic, but I think anybody who looks at the drug scheduling, the DEA schedules, has to agree that this is kind of crazy. So we've got cannabis as a Schedule I drug, meaning there is no medicinal purpose whatsoever, and that it is very, very dangerous. Fentanyl is a Schedule II drug. So, I mean, and that destroys so many things. As a Schedule I drug, it's much more difficult to get funding for any kind of studies. And then people that want to go after drugs as the villain say, well, we don't have enough studies. How can we legalize? Because we don't have studies. Well, we can't get the studies because it's Schedule I. So barriers to success are prevalent even when medications are allowed or known about. So those medications that I talked about that will cut the overdose rates by half, here's just some of the things that we deal with as far as barriers. Just replacing one addiction for another. You're taking one drug and replacing it for the other. You're not clean. Physician shortages. At this point, we are so worried about the drug itself rather than the addiction and what we can do to treat that. Physician shortages are making it very difficult to find physicians who will diagnose and prescribe these medications. In addition, we have pain patients that are literally going to the streets and buying tainted drugs and dying of overdose because they've been cut off of their pain medications. And the physicians are literally being invaded by the DEA. The DEA also creates medication shortages because they dictate how much of any given drug can be manufactured. So we have a mental health crisis in the country. That will happen when you have people being taken off of their medications or having trouble getting them, so they're on and off and on and off. That is a recipe for disaster for addiction or for mental health. Scheduling and access to medications, travel restrictions. If someone wants to travel, you can't fill a script for a controlled substance out of state. And it's very difficult because of the PDMP system that tracks all medications. If you go to different pharmacies, you'll be flagged as a script shopper, and you will probably have trouble getting medications. The insurance regulations are very, very strict. If someone wants to take a trip and it happens to be during the time that they'd fill their script, they're probably out of luck. Supposedly you can get waivers, but what I've seen is it's very difficult. There's risk in adjusting the type and quantity of meds for best results. So let's look at any other medical process. You probably would be adjusting medications. You know, maybe you need a little more, maybe you need a little less. But in these cases, if you adjust medications and it leads to a relapse, you end up behind bars. So what I'm seeing is that people are actually taking more of the medications and not taking the risk of being able to monitor how little they can take because they're afraid of relapse and criminal justice issues. We also have a risk of OWI in Michigan, DUI in other states, even if taken per prescription. So if you're taking prescription Suboxone, for example, and you're pulled over, you can be arrested. There is an affirmative defense saying, I have scripts for these, but if there is any claim whatsoever that you were not operating, at full capacity, you can still be charged. In a case where someone had just gotten out of the hospital, still had incisions in his side, couldn't stand for 30 seconds with his arms at his side, was taking scripts according to what he was supposed to take, and ended up in jail, which wasn't good. Just getting out of, having open incisions and all that, not a good situation. So there's risk even if you're taking the medications as prescribed. And there is a risk that meds will be denied if you're arrested. So if you're on Suboxone, methadone, particularly those two, and you're arrested for something that can be totally unrelated, but you go to jail, and you don't even have to be charged because they can hold you for 3 to 5 days, depending on whether it's over a weekend or not. You will probably go through withdrawal in jail, and then when you're released, your tolerance levels will be reduced, so you're at much higher risk of overdose. I understand that there are challenges for the criminal justice system with having medications in jail, but that doesn't make it right to take them away. And maybe if we just quit putting people in jail for possession of drugs, we could solve that problem. So Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, says, we all want to protect our families from the potential harm of drugs, but if our children do develop a drug problem, surely we will want them cared for as patients in need of treatment and not branded as criminals. So last question, true or false, parents helping teen or adult children is enabling. That is false, with the exception, I mean, if parents are paying off credit cards on, freeing up lines of cash to facilitate drug buys, that's not a good idea. But with a criminal justice system that is this dysfunctional, having parents advocating for their children, figuring out what treatment does make sense, giving emotional support, sometimes helping with housing, really does make sense. And it breaks my heart that a lot of parents are told otherwise. This is a bipartisan failure, and I'm not going to take the time to go through this tonight, but in the book, there is a history of the war on drugs. And the reason I mention this is that it's important for us all to be talking about the kinds of things I'm covering here tonight, because if we are divided based on whether it's party or ideology or whatever, education is the way to proceed. And we have had a lot of really bad drug policy from both sides of the aisle. So let's talk about 3 actionable, let's find some solutions here. First, treat addiction as the health issue it is. We've talked a lot about that. And I'm going to skip through a few slides here just for purposes of time. But we've talked about the health issue. That would solve so many things. We do have to realize, though, that treating it as a health issue, what that means is legalizing drugs. And that sounds radical. But if you look at what is happening right now, that's pretty radical. So legalizing drugs really is similar to whiskey. I mean, just because it's legal, it doesn't mean that I want my little grandchild to drink it. And it's unlikely that he will, but I would much rather have someone be able to go and get something that's clean, that's monitored, rather than going to the street. And we also have Portugal. We have some of the cannabis legislation that's been going on. We have some roadmaps. This isn't new stuff, but ultimately we have to legalize, because if we don't, we're saying if you have a drug, lock them up. That is what being illegal means. So that is the solution. In the meantime, taking personal action to create change. You really, everyone here, everyone listening, has a lot more power than what you realize. Whether you're an employer opening opportunity, whether you're a landlord allowing someone a place to live. And I understand if somebody's in active addiction, you probably don't want to rent to them, but there are so many people that would be wonderful and very appreciative tenants or employees that are not given a chance just because of criminal records. Criminal justice and other professionals, a lot of them, their hearts are in the right place, but they don't understand. Some of them do, but they're working within a system that mandates certain things. And family and community members, taxpayers and voters, when you vote, really look at what somebody's saying, because when they say, I want to provide more funding for addiction services, drill down and figure out what that means, because it may just mean more money for criminal justice. So harm reduction is where Pam's group comes in. Until we can change things, there are so many things that we can do to save lives. Carry Narcan, and I'm sure that everyone listening is aware of Narcan. It's so easy at this point. It's a nasal spray, and you can save a life. It has just passed that it will be an over-the-counter prescription or an over-the-counter drug. With that in mind, though, if anybody can get a prescription and your insurance will cover, now's the time to do that before that's effective. But it is wonderful that it will be an over-the-counter medication, and I would have hoped it would have been long ago, but carry it with you, because you never know when you're going to use it. And when you take it out of the box, it's very small. It's easy to have some around. There are fentanyl test strips available. They're in a little packet. They're $2, and they can. Yeah, Pam's holding them up. These are $2. It allows people to test their drugs for fentanyl. There's a lot of people who say, "Oh, this is promoting drug use." You're going to use anyway. Let's save a life. I mean, $2 could have saved Prince's life, or Tom Petty. These, unfortunately, in Michigan, they are legal. There are a lot of states where fentanyl test strips are illegal. Beyond me. And low-level arrests, just a few days in jail is no small thing. It turns into a criminal university. It can put people into withdrawal. It can change their identity. And in jails, the suicide rates are horrendous. And most of the suicides in jails are before someone is charged. It's when they're on the hold before they're even charged. But the suicide rates in jails are truly horrendous. Be aware of the heightened risk when someone is let out of jail. They are at much higher risk of overdose because their tolerance levels are down. So if they get out and start taking the same level of drug that they were taking before they went in, they may overdose. And late night release from jail. A lot of jails will release prisoners at the change of shifts, which sometimes is in the middle of the night. So you want a recipe for a problem? Tolerance levels are down, trauma, anxiety, isolation, all of that, and now you throw them out in the middle of the night. Educate others about risks of overdose and Good Samaritan laws. It's important for everyone to know that there are Good Samaritan laws, so that if someone witnesses somebody else overdosing and they help them, they can't be charged with possession themselves, because otherwise people die because the people with them are afraid that they will be arrested. There are differences in jurisdictions, so look at the details, but it is important to realize that. And be aware of the racist elements of the war on drugs. We are finally hearing a lot about that, but right now we have more Black Americans in jails, prisons, parole, and probation than there were slaves prior to the Civil War. So it really is pretty horrendous. Having said that, to me, our focus needs to be on changing the drug laws, because that would be the #1 way to solve the issues and to end the racist policies. Most importantly, be kind and remember it could be your child. So if you or someone you love has been personally impacted, I just want you to know that despite all of these issues, there is hope. I mean, we have tools at our disposal at this point that we've never had before. And we have an awareness because of the incredible number of lives lost. We have an awareness where I am starting to see people open-minded that were not open-minded before. So in conclusion, there will be a time when we will look back at the era of the war on drugs as a dark blight on history. The questions are, how long will this failed war go on? How many people will die or sit in cages as their lives pass? How many families will grieve the fatalities and the wasted life created by this war? It's time to end the war on drugs. It's time to end the war on us. Let's do it now. Please share the knowledge. Together, we can make a difference. Thanks. So I would love input from the audience. I mean, any personal stories, any questions, anything that comes to mind, or any comments. I don't know if this was shocking to any of you, or if this group is pretty well informed. But any questions? Okay, otherwise, if anybody wants to come up afterward also, I will be here for a while. So thanks a lot for coming, and I really appreciate your interest and your attendance. Thanks.